And I realized it's March, and it's the middle of the school year. And I tell my wife, we didn't think of something. Our little girl doesn't speak English. We are French-speaking people. And we learned to speak English in school, but she had never been to school. So I said, how is she going to cope? So anyway, we went to school and we met the teacher. And she said, Mr. Dholah, don't worry about it. She's going to be fine. I said, you don't understand. You're going to put this little girl who doesn't speak a word of English with 20 or 30, I don't know how many in your classroom, who speak only English. She said, trust me, don't worry about it. She's going to be fine. But anyway, we needed babysitting, so she stayed in school. We had to look for work. And the Thursday afternoon, another Thursday, Caroline came home and said, Mom, Dad, I have a new friend. Of course, in French. I said, oh, that's great. I said, what's her name? Sarah. Oh, wonderful. She'd take a little piece of paper. Can I call her? I said, sure. So Mom called her, and the mom picked up, and here you go. And after 2 seconds, I told my jaw dropped. I said to my wife, are you hearing what I'm hearing? She was having a conversation in English like she had only spoken English in her life. I thought, wow, that was a lesson that we got. We didn't understand the lesson then. But anyway, that was a good thing, one of the good things. And we have to start looking for work. But I have to tell you, we came here because at the time in 87, Canada, or maybe Ontario, but Canada was looking for bilingual people, French-speaking people. So we came here, and work was easy for us we were easy to find work. There's no horror stories there. But the difficulty we encountered was, I found work at a great company called Kellogg, the Kellogg Company, the cereal Kellogg Company. And in my interview there, I told the lady, after 2 interviews, she says, I'm going to tell you just right now, you got the job. I said, thank you. I want to mention something. I said, I've been to 6 other interviews before I got here, and everybody asked me at the end of the interview, or told me, you don't have Canadian experience. I found that surprising each and every time I went. She said to me, how would I look if I asked you for Canadian experience when I looked at your resume and I'd call you for an interview? I would look like an idiot. And I thought, wow, that's true. You can tell that I don't have Canadian experience. But I was so happy to pick up the job at that company. This is a company that when you start working, they give you a little pamphlet like this by W.K. Kellogg, the founder of the company. His first words in there is, I will invest my money in people first. And I say this company is like a university. Until today, they are still true to that word. The mentoring, the courses, the library, personal growth library in that company, it was just extraordinary. 2 years after I started working there, the company was growing. 2 years after I started, my boss called me in her office and said, close the door, we have to talk about work. I thought I was in trouble. We talk about work, it's the end of the day. I'm thinking, what's going on? She said, you know, we're working on a position in this department. We had only 1 manager and 5 people, 4 women and me, like 5 women all together and with me. And she said, yeah, we're going to talk about your work. And I really thought I had done something, I cannot remember I did something wrong. She said, we are working on this new position that you're aware of that, right? I said, yeah. I said, we're going to give you that position. Now I put my Mauritian hat on and I said, I'm still walking here, I can't run. I just got here 2 years ago. We have people who have been here for 18, 20 years in that department. I said, what are they going to think? How am I going to manage that? Really, that was surprising for me when she gave me that job. She said, you don't know your colleague. Nobody wants extra responsibility. I said, okay. So that was like a second blessing from my daughter speaking English just like that. And I found that she told me a lesson that when you take things for granted, you really don't get any more than what you take for granted. I was having lessons after lessons. being here. Like I wasn't even looking for them. And I started picking up the books that was in our library. You trade books. You come in and you give one and you take another one. And I picked up that book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, later. But at that time, I picked up a book called Lead the Field by Earl Nightingale. I don't know if anybody heard of Earl Nightingale. And I read that first chapter of that program, if you will, called Attitude. I listened, it was on tape, cassette tapes. At the time I had a cassette tape in my car. And I had listened to that Attitude cassette like probably a couple 100 times. And that, actually I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't tell you back then. But I was learning how to live in this country because we were by ourselves. We had nobody to depend on. If we didn't make it right with our jobs, we were in trouble. We were not thinking of that consciously, but our actions were reflecting that. Maybe we were afraid to lose our jobs, but I don't know that. I started to understand more and more about how to behave in this country. What I realized is I was living consciously. In Mauritius, I was laid back. I had everybody there. I had nothing to care for, really. When I came here, I had responsibilities. And I thought, we have to make it happen, without even thinking consciously. But our actions were reflecting that. Now looking back, I can tell you this is what we were doing. So 3 years into being in Canada, in March of 1990, our second daughter was born. Now we have a Canadian at home. But this one came with a house. Now what do I mean by that? As she was born in March, and a few months later we bought our first house. And I remember going to work and telling my colleagues, on such and such day, I need to go and sign papers at the lawyer's office because of the house purchase. And I remember one lady, I can see her face still, saying, "You bought a house?" I said, yeah, we found a little 3-bedroom condo, low-rise, and I'm explaining. And she said, "You bought a house?" I said, yeah. I didn't understand what she was doing. And she said, "How did you do that?" I thought she was asking me a question. How do you do that? That's a question. I started explaining. I said, we're first-time buyers. We only need 5% down. And everybody started laughing. And I realized that she wasn't asking me how. She was just saying, "How come you bought a house?" And what I found was it was not easy to buy a house. But it was not very difficult to do it here. If you really think about it, most of what we think is difficult here is not. This is a country where abundance is everywhere. I know that firsthand because of where I came from. And I teach that to my daughters. I tell them, I read something in a book saying, do more than you get paid for from time to time, so you get paid more than what you are working for. I don't remember who said that, but I kept hammering that when they were in high school, and they get that. But my point is, we had to make sure we make it here without intentionally doing that, because our behavior had to be like that. And all the books that I read and everything, nothing compares to the lessons that I got from talking to people at work, with my boss, and learning from people to learn what not to do. And today I have 2 homes, one in Mauritius and one here, and 2 countries, and I am so grateful to have that experience of being in Canada, because if I had stayed home, I would still be just living a life fine. But all of the lessons that I gotten, I would never have seen the light as I see it today. I think another lesson that I got is if you give first, you will always get, because when you focus on what you don't have, you keep getting what you don't have. And that's the lesson that I learned being in Canada. I mean, coming into Canada is just like we came here, we started learning without even studying. And that's my gratitude to be here. And I'm grateful to be here tonight to share my story. Thank you.